All right, there we are. All right. Are we live? Okay, there we are. We are live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Angel Editors Part 1 of our two-part streaming special, Heroes versus Villains. We are here tonight to talk about heroes. And joining us today are some fabulous Angel Editors. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves?
I'll start. I'm Diane Telgen. I'm one of the editors. I love to work on all sorts of things, different age groups, different genres, and my favorite type of hero. Let's say I do like a tragic hero, so I'll put in a vote for tragedy.
Well, I'm Jen Bailey, and I'm another one of well, obviously we're all the editors, right? And I work on multiple age ranges too, picture books up through YA. And I am the reluctant hero fan. I love me a reluctant hero because basically you have to pry me off the couch too. So that's my favorite.
Marissa?
Sure. I'm Marissa Graff. I am also, as Jen Bailey points out, obviously an editor. I typically like to work with middle grade and young adult, and the specific genre is not so much an issue. And my favorite hero is definitely an underdog, somebody who we don't necessarily see the full potential that we might see by the end of the story, but somebody who we see enough hope in the novel's opening that we can get behind them in those early pages.
Awesome. Thank you. Suma?
Hi, I'm Suma, and I like epic heroes.
Okay, so first off, because we're talking about heroes, I want to talk about I should probably introduce myself. I'm Kate Angelella. I am the co-owner of Angelella Editorial. And my favorite too is the reluctant hero because I feel like I can relate to that character best. Okay, so first I want to talk about what constitutes a hero to all you guys. Like, what do you think makes a hero to begin with?
So when I was thinking about that, I mean, first things, especially because Marvel dominates everywhere, um, is you think about superheroes or something like that. But seeing as how I like the reluctant hero, the kind that isn't really sure he's in it for the win, um, I think that kind of hero, not only is this somebody who's going to be taking heroic actions, and most likely against his will or against his better judgment, but I think they also have to have an element of something to aspire to. Either they're just, when the chips are down, they're just braver than you'd think, or they're just kinder to their dog, or, you know, I think that there has to be an aspirational element. Not only do you connect with them on some level, but there's something that they're just better at. And it doesn't always have to be, strength or smarts or something along those lines. It can be something, um, a bit more normal.
Yeah, I think a key word in there is act. Your hero has to be someone who does things and who acts, who makes choices, and sometimes those choices may not be great ones. Sometimes they may be ones that we admire. Um, but someone who makes choices and acts so that things happen, because otherwise you don't have a story.
I agree. I think with any given hero, no matter what arc and what type you're going with, you've got to equip a hero with enough agency, enough their own drive, their own willingness to take actions, and even the reluctant hero, we need to be able to see that arc where we see them engage at some point because they basically have no other choice. So somebody who's slowly building their tool set to become more capable come the full climax.
Yeah, and I also think that it's usually the hero who drives the plot in a story, and so it's important to think about the situations that they find themselves in, and how they react to those situations, and what is about those situations that makes them do great deeds, uh, which they wouldn't do otherwise. They would have just continued with their normal lives.
Okay, and this is something that we were talking about a little bit on our Angel Editors chat. Do you guys differentiate between hero, protagonist, and main character? Is there a difference? And if so, can you be both? Can these roles be different in the same book? What do you think?
Well, Webster says they're the same thing, essentially. If you actually go to Merriam-Webster, it will say the main character or the protagonist is the main actor in a story. I mean, for me, I think when I hear the word hero, it has that connotation of more positive qualities, like bravery or determination or curiosity or intelligence. But certainly your main character or protagonist doesn't have to be heroic as we think about it. I'm curious what other people think.
I do think the same. Um, and I think, yes, so there is a hero, protagonist, main character, and we could have one or more than one hero in a novel, no? And the most important thing is to find out if the character um, is affected by something, is affected by the situation that's around them. So they should not be effectless. And they should be interesting, and they should have attitudes about the events and objects in their world and react to them. And that's what makes them a hero.
So I was thinking a little bit differently about it. So, as I said, I thought about this hard today. So I was looking at the main character as the person who we're seeing the story through. So that isn't always your protagonist or your hero. So, and I did see some examples and I explored them. So in Shawshank Redemption, the story is about Andy, but we don't see it through Andy's eyes. We see it through Red's eyes. So I see, and we don't know anything about Andy unless Red tells us. And we don't experience anything with Andy unless we're experiencing it through the filter of Red. So I was thinking Red is really the main character, and Andy is the protagonist. Andy is what drives that story from the beginning. And once he escapes, the story is essentially over. We do get to pick it up a little bit, but we're really done. So the last part, I don't want to give anything away, but the last part would be more of a coda. And it was making me think, I started to think about Lord of the Rings as well, where you have Frodo and you have Aragorn, and those could be considered, Frodo definitely as probably a protagonist, the reason that we're on this journey, but Sam is a hero. So, to me, he's probably the most heroic of the whole group, because he's put up against, his world is going to be changing and yet not changing. So I don't know. I mean, I wanted to throw that out there, as in, I think you've got three different people in those books taking on those roles of main character who's the story through, and then the protagonist who's driving the change, who's causing the story to happen, and then the hero who is stepping up to take heroic action at critical moments. So I was thinking it could be three different ones, three different characters. Tough, but...
Yeah, I definitely agree that your point of view character or your narrator isn't always going to be the same as your protagonist or your hero. One of my favorite classics is Wuthering Heights, which is told from the point of view of this guy who, he cracks me up, really. I think Wuthering Heights is hysterical because the narrator is telling the story of this great romance between Catherine and Heathcliff, and essentially saying, well, I would be just like Heathcliff if I ever left my living room. So definitely, the narrator is not a hero. He is not a main character. He's just the narrator whose point of view is is demonstrating everything that's happening. So I definitely think you need to distinguish between your point of view character and narrator, and your hero or your protagonist. That's great.
Yeah, I think it thickens the task any author would have to do if your protagonist was not your viewpoint character, because you really have to fuse your reader with both the protagonist or your viewpoint character and your hero, and it's almost kind of double duty because we need to be able to root for both. And I would argue that the narrator, you still need some sense of an arc out of a narrator viewpoint character, even if they're not the hero.
Absolutely.
So that, I think that interplay between protag and hero, if they're separate, is just, it's a feat. It can be done, but I don't think we see it that often for a reason.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, so it can be that what we get driven to by observing that heroic character. Now we want to embrace that for ourselves, or now we want to, and it could be the main character's adoration for the protagonist that feeds our own. We want to like who people like. So, I'm thinking that's a way to help with that connection. I know we're going to get into how do you connect to an anti-hero or how do we do that? And I think that this is a way that if you separated them and you had a protagonist who could be the goading factor, who could be telling you all of the things or all the reasons why the hero is or is not doing what they're doing, or I should say main character, because we're talking about who's telling the story. I just see that as a possibility for causing the connection to happen, because we'll admire who our narrator admires, because that's the only truth we know is through their eyes. So it's helpful.
Thanks, guys. I think that those are all good points, and it's a lot murkier than Webster's would lead us to believe, but it's good because it allows for different types of heroes, and I'd like to seg into that a little bit. There are lots of different hero archetypes. We're talking about Diane's favorite tragic hero, the reluctant hero. There's the classical or epic hero. I want to hear a little bit more about why your heroes are your favorite types of heroes and what kind of defines each one.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that tragic heroes are my favorite ones, but there's just something about a tragic hero. So a tragic hero is, that's when you think of your classical or your Shakespearean tragedy, someone like Hamlet, or Romeo and Juliet, where the arc of their story does not end happily, but they somehow find a moment in the way that they act, that there's a bit of triumph in overcoming, or in dealing with tragic events, that I find appealing. I don't see it that often because I read a lot and I work with a lot of young adult and middle grade, and that is definitely a tough thing to do in YA, especially if your main character, your protagonist, is going to be a tragic hero. I think you have to have some bit of hope at the end, and maybe that is through your narrator character instead. But there's just something about seeing the human spirit triumph against all odds, even in the face of tragedy, that I find really, I won't say appealing, but really moving.
What about the reluctant hero, Jen? You mentioned that was your favorite, and it's mine too.
I love them, and I think I think it's because to me they're closest to the most of us. I mean that you would hope that when push comes to shove, you'll stand up. That you'll be able to do the good deed, that you'll be better than you know you are in your heart. And I think that's what I like about The Reluctant Hero. I'm a huge film noir fan, and that's so many noir heroes or anti-heroes are the reluctant hero. They have been given a load of crap, and now they have to shovel it, and it's and they can grumble about it, and they can, there's no there's no, well, of course that's what I'll do. It's just, oh, doesn't this stink? And yet I'm going to get through. And like what Diane was saying, I mean, there's something about that perseverance. But I want them to have a little reward there at the end, Diane, not a poison.
No poison apple for you.
So I want, but that is what I love about The Reluctant Hero, because it just feels closer to me, as in, for the most part, I'll sit this one out. But when it all falls in my lap,
Yeah.
okay, all right. And as I said, it's that aspiration that oh, what does Winnie the Pooh say? You're smarter than you think. And you're going to be better than you think you are, and you'll be able to do it. And that's something that really appeals to me.
Yeah, I was thinking about this with a story like Amal Unbound, the middle grade from, I believe, last year. What I enjoy about a story or a hero like that is that there's this character whose world is relatively small, and they have their known, and life throws them circumstances that throw them in a completely different direction, and force them to kind of broaden the scope for what they want for themselves to be even bigger than maybe what they had imagined or envisioned their world to be. A character like that, probably one of my favorites of all time, Okay for Now by Gary Schmidt. Doug, the main character, Doug, the novel throws circumstances his way that he would never imagine for himself, and it's almost like whether he likes it or not, he's going to open up his world and be changed. So kind of like you, Jen, the reluctant hero. But
Was there any? Were there any archetypes that were people's favorites that we didn't touch on?
The classical heroes that
Yeah.
we talked about. Um, so I recently I've just been enjoying reading a lot of mythologies and books on religion and ethics and comics and movies. So I'm drawn to everything from Hercules and Theseus to Jesus Christ and Siddhartha and Krishna, and also Superman and Tarzan and Luke Skywalker. So these are great heroes who embody the classical strength, bravery, and determination, and also overcome personal flaws and limitations, and entered the unknown to face their deepest challenges and return to the world with a gift, which is the classical hero's journey. And there is also spiritual enlightenment involved and salvation, and they selflessly sacrifice and face a great threat to save the world and save people of the world. And I'm drawn to that kind of a hero. Um, and recently, also, there are a number of books um, that portray the epic hero. For example, Linda Sue Park's Archer's Quest, which was a middle grade novel about a 12-year-old boy who couldn't care less about his heritage, but he's shocked when a ruler from ancient Korea shows up in his modern day New York bedroom, complete with bows and arrows.
Oh,
So
cool.
that was a very interesting story that I read. And then there was Shannon Hale's Book of a Thousand Days, which also was about a woman who refuses to marry a man she fears, and she and her maid are locked in a tower with just a tiny flap open to the outside world. So, uh, so that was another one, with a fierce linear protagonist that followed the classical epic hero journey. And then Echo by Pam Bruno's Ryan was another beautiful story about being lost and alone in a forbidden forest with mysterious sisters and a puzzling quest and a prophecy and a promise, and there was music involved. So uh, there are quite a number of examples, and it seems like a lot of um, writers are pretty much diversifying themselves in terms of creating these different kinds of heroes, and the classical hero also does find a place among all the archetypes.
So that's an interesting point about classical heroes, and I'm glad somebody chose that as their favorite because I think it can be a really overlooked hero. I think that I call it Superman syndrome. We can get a little bit bored with the classical hero. We can kind of roll our eyes at the classical hero. Actually, when we decided to split this live stream up into two conversations, heroes and villains, I was a little bit afraid that nobody would want to talk about heroes because I think as we get older, we are a little more drawn to villains. They're a little bit more fun to talk about. So I want to talk about how to make a hero more interesting, more fun, a little more along the lines of three-dimensional and complicated, the way that we tend to look at villains. So first of all, why do you guys think that heroes get a bad rap as dull? And how do we create dynamic heroes that escape that issue?
Well, I'm trying to remember where I've seen it discussed several times that your hero, they can be wise and good and brave and strong and have all those classical attributes, but that it's really good for your hero to have a fundamental misbelief about the way the world works that causes them to make mistakes. That when they're faced with a choice, maybe they make the wrong one. They assume something about the way the world works, and so the journey they make is not only to overcome whatever trials may be in their way, but also to complete an emotional journey where they learn something. Oh, I've misunderstood this about the world, whether it's about love or friendship or any of those big themes that we all want to know, we all want to feel when we're reading. And so to start your heroic character with some kind of misbelief or misunderstanding gives them room to grow and change, and I think that's what's going to make for a satisfying journey.
Yeah, so I think when what you were saying, Kate, when they're, even Superman has his kryptonite, right? And so you have to have that moment, and even trying to remember the characters, even the overconfidence of a hero who knows he's a hero. I mean, Lancelot. I'm going to be the best one out there, right? And we'll find it. So even if they don't know, as you were saying, Diane, their flaw, we sometimes will follow them, rooting for them to find it, rooting maybe a little bit against them. In Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm sorry, what's Finn's character's name? All I can think of. Groot? Not Groot. Oh, sorry, not Finn. Oh my gosh. There you go. His overconfidence. The overconfidence of I got this. Sometimes that's the kind of hero that just delights me. Because it's like they're gonna get the comeuppance, and maybe it's more of a slapstick feel to it, but it's like, and you're just waiting, and meanwhile, you love their confidence. It's you go, do it. But when it happens, we'll all learn together. Well, actually, the character will learn. and we'll have a good chuckle.
Well, there is something really satisfying about failure, right? I mean, not only is it something that we can relate to, but what good would a happy ending be if there was no failure to overcome along the way?
Hmm. Yeah, I think something common that you oftentimes see, even in my own writing, is our tendency to kind of protect our heroes and want to not allow them to fail, but that constant zigzag of another attempt. Sometimes those attempts are successful, and obviously sometimes they're not. But those are obviously the ones that yield a lot of knowledge in terms of learning, both for the reader and for the characters. So those instances where we as writers protect our protagonists and they almost seem a little too perfect tend to, I think, be where we lose connection. We lose the ability to really bring a reader closer. Um, and I was also thinking about, what Sima was saying about the hero's journey, and it's so true. We're so drawn to those stories. And I'm also very in awe and almost puzzled at times of stories with smaller scope. When you think about Catherine Applegate's Wish Tree, if you've read that, it's the scope is so small. It's a tree, and I kept thinking as I opened this book, how is she? But of course, it's Catherine Applegate because she's able to do anything. How is she going to make this tree an active participant and in fact the protagonist in this story? And I think it just goes to show that you can really push yourself and dig deep to give your protagonist actions and agency that keep a reader hooked, even if the scope of the world is actually quite small in a story.
These are great points. I agree with everything that everyone said. The only thing I would like to add is that a dynamic hero is someone who experiences some kind of journey. It has to
Mm-hmm.
be physical, spiritual, or emotional, and that is something that we learn from David Gill, from the Faculty of Easy Fate. And they may or may not experience some kind of a change as a result of the journey. So um, there are two key hero elements that, which is uh, learning or practicing self-sacrifice in helping others, and learning or practicing the ability to take action. So there's one example that I can give that I just read, that I just finished reading, which is Sage Blackwood's Miss Ellicott's School for the Magically Minded. So that story is actually, it's a story about self-sacrifice because the hero puts herself in danger, and she works to secure safety to for the younger girls at school and all the people of who are around her. So that was just another, good example of a story where the archetypal roles that we normally look at are not meant to serve simply as labels for the characterizations of heroes, but instead, we can still dig deeper and get real with every character that we create.
I'm really psyched to have those examples, you guys, too. So thank you for bringing up all of these great examples. I'm going to go back and watch this and write down all of the names of these books so I can read them. Um, so while we're kind of talking about flaws and how the hero changes from on the journey that he or she goes through throughout the course of the story, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we give our characters flaws without making them unlikable, because it's a pretty fine line between so flawed that we're just not even rooting for them and flawed to the point of humanizing.
I think one thing you can always do um, there's a couple of elements. One is give your character, even if they're, if they're a prickly, angry person, either give them a vulnerability, so show in a way, show them where they can be hurt, um, or else you can put them at the low end of a power imbalance. So, because our tendency is to root for the underdog. So if you have a main character who's sarcastic and unpleasant, but maybe they're at the end of a power balance where someone else is worse, we're going to root for them because, oh, look at them. They, of course, they can't be whiny about it. Um, I had an editor once make a very good point to me about the opening of Harry Potter. Here's this boy he's living under the staircase, and his cousin is getting all these presents, and he doesn't demand that we feel sorry. He doesn't go around like, oh, I'm so miserable, and how come I don't get any presents? And there's spiders when I sleep. No, he
That's
never
right.
says anything about it. And in that way, J.K. Rowling is allowing the reader to build empathy. You know, he's in, she's inviting the reader to empathize. And I think so. You create a vulnerability in some way and invite the reader to sympathize with that power imbalance. That can go a long way to balancing a supposedly unpleasant main character.
And that's exactly the word that I looked at with likability. I was like, it's more sympathy. What we're really doing is we're making a more intimate connection. If you don't look at the whole likability thing, which I see as fairly surface, if we can make them sympathetic, they can be horrible as long as they're sympathetic to us. Disney does it by killing off the parents right away.
That's true.
Because and usually with the sacrifice, because you think, okay, anybody who this person sacrificed themselves for is somebody that I just have so much sympathy for. And so I think that I love Diane's topic about the power imbalance, and because we all feel trod upon at some point. We all feel like our viewpoint is not being heard, or if it's heard, it's misunderstood. And so as long as we can create a sympathetic connection, an intimate connection, we can have somebody who's not overly likable.
Yeah, I think a good study in this is again looking at OK for Now, because we meet a character who is pretty prickly in the opening, and we get hints, and it takes some orchestration, but we get hints that there is an underlying pain. If we wait it out and we put our trust in the writer, that will slowly unroll that storyline, and we'll understand what has fed the viewpoint, or kind of like the moral code of that protagonist. So, they can be prickly, but we need to see, just as Diane was saying, a vulnerability, even if it's tiny, and some logic. If you just have a jerk character for the sake of being a jerk, I think it falls flat and feels pretty cardboard. But somebody that we get even the slightest hint early on that there's actually some reasoning that we will find out about.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone said. So if I were to categorize flaws, I would categorize them as physical flaws and maybe personality flaws. So if I talk about physical flaws, they're usually minor flaws or major flaws depending on the book. For example, in one boy, the character was physically, um, you know, he did have a major physical challenge. So now once uh, that character has accepted um, as being part of him, the flaw being part of him, that inconveniences him or the others not. And we'll have to note that every flaw that will inconvenience our character uh, actually add depth to the character. So, for example, if cracking someone's knuckles, for example, probably won't inconvenience everyone. But if there is the character has asthma, it could inconvenience the protagonist. Or if they're physically trying to chase down the antagonist down the street, asthma is a problem. So that's something that we have to consider. The other is, I did talk about personality flaws. Now, if we think about personality flaws, these are usually major flaws that inhibit the character for defeating the villain. So they're usually life altering, and uh, the the ideals of the hero may be initially skewed. Their traits are going to stop them from accomplishing their goals. For example, maybe they're absent-minded, or they're abusive, or they're blunt, or they're conceited, um, or they're self-righteous, snobby, anything like that. And in any case, I think characters need flaws to be realistic for us to create tension. So Lisa Cron um, is a great example. We discussed her a lot last time, thanks to Diane. She does talk about flaws in her book too, and she talks about characters needing a psychological weakness and a moral weakness. So we'll have to think about psychological weakness as someone who's lacking confidence or who's scarred by something that happened to them in the past. Um, and a moral weakness is, how does this character treat everyone around them, and how are they treated by everyone around them? So if we look at, I know we discussed a lot of middle grade and young adult novels, but I thought I could even talk about a few picture books, like This Is Not My Hat by John Clason, which is, it's full on steel. It's about the fish in the story that is full on steal in someone else's item of clothing. So we'll have to bear in mind that he's punished pretty heavily for it behind the scenes. So that's a flaw, but it's an adorable flaw. And then there's the other one by Oliver Jeffers, which is This Moose Belongs to Me.
Oh, I love that book. Love that book.
Paul wants to deprive a wild creature of its autonomy. So that's a major flaw. Then Who Wants to Be a Poodle? I Don't by Lauren Child. Have you heard of that? So that one is very similar in that the adult character and the child stand in, and they're not letting their pet dog behave like a dog. So
I love that.
these are great examples, I think, some good examples in picture books, uh, uh, which pretty much clarify how well we could use flaws. Again, when we talk about psychological weakness, there's Where the Wild Things Are, which is the most popular book. All right, and it's about again, Max is just another child who faces his own temper, though and then there's the other book, which is Z is for Moose, for Kelly Bingham and Paul Ozelinsky, where there is a moose who basically throws a temper tantrum because things don't go his way. So these are some examples where some of the most interesting characters and beloved characters that we've loved over the years do have flaws, and they don't necessarily have to be from the viewpoint character, but heroes have flaws.
Those are all very good points, and I am excited to think about that now in terms of anti-heroes, which are a totally different thing. But flaws are a good way to segue into that, I think. So when we talk about a hero and an anti-hero, what are the major differences between them? And can you guys talk a little bit about some examples to give people a frame of reference for anti-hero?
I think one of my favorite recent ones would be Kaz in Six of Crows by Lee Bardugo. He is a thief. He's actually the head of a criminal enterprise. When we first meet him, he's very he has associates, but he keeps them at arm's length. He is doing things that are morally dubious, and we're not quite sure whether to root for him. But I think looking again at how you make this kind of character appealing, number one is at the beginning of this book, you can see that he is fighting another criminal enterprise, which seems to be stronger and more evil, I guess, more nefarious than his. So he is at the low end of a power imbalance. And we are also given clues throughout that opening. So this character he's just physically unable to let anyone touch him. Even one of his female associates that we think, oh, maybe there could be a love interest there, seems to be the person he dislikes the least. And when we eventually get that story of why he can't let anyone touch him, oh my God, it knocked me out. And so this is someone that when you read, to me, he felt like your typical anti-hero. You know, didn't really have any of those noble, heroic qualities, but oh, I love those. I mean, that book and the sequel, just wonderful.
That's on my list. I'm really excited to read it, especially now.
I think also making sure, I mean, an anti-hero is, as Diane's saying, someone who you wouldn't necessarily classically root for. If someone was telling you about this person being a thief, or, somebody like Walter White in Breaking Bad, you're not necessarily getting behind that person. You wouldn't say you see yourself in them necessarily, but when well written or well portrayed, somebody whose desire line is portrayed clearly enough, that we understand what this person needs and we understand why. And I think if done well, it's enough for us to get on board with that particular character, because we need to see if they're able to get what they need just as well.
I think that that's the important part, is that desire line, and sometimes it can be pushed way, way deep into the novel. I mean, I love the Artemis Fowl books by Ian Colfer. I think that those are a lot of fun, and there's a great anti-hero. I mean, when you meet him, he's he's setting a trap to catch the fairy, and he's not a very nice boy. Let's just put it that way. But what you love about him is he's clever and he's quick and he's thought of everything, and it's a bit Sherlock Holmesian, I think, in how you get to meet him. He's not very likable, but my goodness, he's going to show you an interesting time. And so once you finally realize, and I don't want to spoil it, but once you finally realize why he's doing all of this, then there's that heart line, that desire line, that you're just like, oh, of course. But he's an awful lot of fun to hang around, because he's going to get you into some trouble, and he's going to get you out.
Do you guys feel like anti-heroes have to be redeemable by the end of the story, or is that a no-no, or where do you stand on redemption for anti-heroes?
I'm wondering if it depends on if they're the protagonist in the book. I mean, I'm thinking about Snape.
Mm-hmm.
And so who was he redeemed for? He was redeemed in. No. If you're spoiled by this, then you should know.
Get out of here.
And that's the only person that needed to see the change. The world does not remember Snape as the hero that we all got to see, which is why Harry's son is having such problems, I think, at the end, and why we get into some things later. But it's so redeemable. I think it depends. Redeemable to who? To the reader, to the world that they inhabit, to the protagonist if they aren't the protagonist.
That's a good point.
And I think also, I mean, you can, again, if you're going to go with the tragic hero, if you look at something like Macbeth, he is not really redeemed at the end, except that he realizes that he's done wrong. And there is satisfaction in seeing an evildoer get caught and be brought to justice. And sure, maybe they realize, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't have done that. It depends on what you are looking for, and who your audience is, I think, and the kind of story you want to tell. I think you have options.
Yeah, I want to talk about Abigail Hass's So the thing is, I know those books were standalones, but I expected that Dangerous Girls um, would be at least filled with the same kind of twists and turns as the first one. But here's what the author did, which was a lot more straightforward. So there was this character called Chloe, who is, for the most part, she appears to be a girl who suffers this kind of neglect that will make her do desperate things, even especially when she meets a boy who uh, brings about her latent dark side, and he draws her into things she's never imagined or she's capable of. Effectively, for me, reading Dangerous Boys first was like studying the evolution of a sociopath and wondering why on earth she seems so strangely relatable. Um, and wondering if maybe that makes you that makes you a sociopath too. It's odd. It's odd. It's really odd, but not a bad feeling at all.
That's a really good point, and I feel like to Marissa's example, Walter White is another similar to that, where we actually start out really empathizing with his plight. And again, if you have not watched and finished Breaking Bad, you should probably just stop watching us and go watch that. But I won't spoil it except to say that it's harder to relate to him at the end. It's harder to empathize with him at the end. His evolution is one that makes him not a a good guy with many redeeming characteristics, and but that's what his journey was meant to be.
I think that's like going back to your original question for me is just that even in an anti-hero, I don't want to see them make a jump that is, so or 180 that it's unbelievable. I think we just need to see some change. And like you were saying, great point about Walter White, because really I felt the exact same way about that series. But the novel's events shaped it to be where you could see there was still logic in the way the author crafted it. So
And I'll also just want to state for the record, while I have a platform, Jesse Pinkman needs his own show. Jesse Pinkman! Okay, done. All right. Anyway, going back to editorial questions. So let's talk about, we've talked a little bit about anti-heroes and flaws, and now I want to talk about desire lines. Desire lines are an essential aspect of a hero's story, and it's something that we want to nail down right away in the opening chapter as soon as possible. So our characters need to want something. What do you think is a good example of a desire line being integral to our connection to a hero? And why do you think it matters so much for our hero to have a desire?
Well, it matters because there has to be something to force someone to act. And, if, and you want someone, of course, you want someone to be active, and it's really hard to, if your character doesn't have a goal or something specific they're chasing, and let me be specific and say an external goal. So like in, let's say, Charlotte's Web, Fern's goal is to save the pig. And that's a very clear goal. And because of that, she is forced to go and do various things. And what you ideally want to have happen with your plot is that your character wants something, therefore they must make a choice to do something, therefore something happens because of that choice, which makes something else happen, whether there's an obstacle they have to get around or a mistake they make. I just think that without that external goal, you're going to find it very difficult to make things happen and keep them interesting. And I am speaking from personal experience. I have tried too many times to work with a protagonist who just wants to be left alone, or they don't want, leave me alone. I don't want to be bullied anymore, or I don't want this, or I don't want that. It's very, very difficult to deal with that. You need to have some kind of external goal at least.
Mhm.
Well, I'm going to take us back then to Oliver Jeffers' book, Miss Moose. Gosh, I love that book. So, so there it is. There's the external goal. That moose is his, and he wants that moose. And when that moose, and he's got all these rules for the moose. And sometimes the moose is good at following rules, which are, we'll stand here in the field. And sometimes the moose is not good at following rules. Um, and when the moose wanders off, the child is forced to reevaluate that external goal. Either he's going to change his desire, or he's going to be disappointed. And it's an interesting, I think, a wonderful moment. And what we find out is that it's an empathetic moment too, because the moose goes on to meet all the other people who want this moose, or who thinks the moose is theirs. So it's, I think that you absolutely have to start with that external goal. It can change, or as we all like to say, you might not get what you want, but you're going to get what you need. That has to be there in the resolution. So what starts you, the impetus, doesn't have to remain the impetus, but there's got to be something there right away.
Mhm.
I was going to add, I think once when I was at school and I heard, all this discussion about desire lines, and the book that I saw that encapsulated it most perfectly is a picture book by Kevin Henkes called Kitten's First Full Moon, which is a Caldecott winning beautiful book. And a kitten sees the moon in the sky and thinks it's a bowl of milk, and then ends up going up a tree and falling out of a tree and chasing the moon to get this. Every time he takes an action to get this milk that he wants, something bad happens, forcing him to try again. And it's just wonderful. And plus kittens.
In the YA category, I really recommend Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater stuff.
Steve Fodder.
Thank you. It's kind of a 2-for-1. You really get two strong viewpoint characters, both with well-defined goals right out of the gate, and even better, the characters both want the exact same thing, and only one can have it. So it's just such a great study in how to drop down that desire line early on and get you rooting for it. But even worse is the conflict of feeling like you want both characters to get what they need and they can't.
Yeah, that pretty much, I think, summarizes what we need and why we need desires. Desires and needs are universally relatable, and everyone has them. So uh, they they pretty much um, form a character's objective as well as motivation. And the objective is what the character wants, and the motivation is why they want it. And desires are things that the characters want, which can be external or internal. And uh, Brown Girl Dreaming is also a good example of that, by Jacqueline Woodson, where um, the character shares her story through poems, and she shares what it's like to grow up as an African American in the 1960s and 70s, living the remnants of Jim Crow, and her growing awareness of the civil rights movement. And every poem is so touching and powerful, and the hero is so accessible and emotionally charged, that each line gives a glimpse into her soul, and she searches for her place in the world. And uh, that is what we want. We want to find out what our story or character's strong goals and wants are through the scenes and chapters that we write.
I think that goal can grow on itself, can compound, I mean, if you go back to Harry Potter, he just wants to get out of the house.
Yeah.
Then he wants to be accepted into Gryffindor. Then he wants. And how often is that the case that we have in our life? That, okay, well, we've got that now. How many times have we said, oh, just give me this and I'll stop asking? So I think that that's another thing that we see in our hero. As they grow and change, so does that need and so does that desire. And so, because sometimes what I've seen in student work sometimes is they start off with a desire line that's insane. No, you can't do that. Starting as this type of a person in this type of situation, you are not going to win American Idol or whatever. I mean, you have to at least sing first. You have to at least go and try out. You have to at least, sometimes there need to be steps. And I do worry about that sometimes on these, in stories, is that some of these writers, I think, can start with too big a goal or too obscure a desire line when we can really keep it simple and then start compounding it to draw the reader along.
And I feel like that's a really good point, because the tension, if you start that high with so much at stake and such a huge goal, there's nowhere to go. So you have a very strong opening and there's no way to sustain that kind of tension, and then the pacing lags. And that's a problem. The closer it gets to the climactic moment, the steeper the stakes should be. And we see that in Harry Potter, right? The stakes at first are that he would have to go back home, which is dreary and awful. But as it gets closer to the climactic moment, there's so much more for him to lose.
I think an interesting book to take a look at is, I don't know if you guys read the thing about jellyfish from a couple of years ago, and kind of conversely to the conversation that we're having, she starts with the goal of trying to explain why a friend of hers drowned, and she can't just accept that she drowned. She wants to explain that it somehow relates to, she was stung by this very, obscure jellyfish, and that has to be why she drowned, because she was a good swimmer. And there's a piece of you as the reader that knows early on that goal is unattainable. She's not going to be able to prove it. In fact, she's going to be, disproven, but you're still on for that ride. And just seeing how the novel's events, as she ticks off that journey of trying to prove that, where it leads her internally, is a really interesting story, a really interesting way of kind of concocting a plot. So a little bit of from Harry Potter going larger, you feel like she's getting to where she has nowhere else to go but to face the truth, which I find an interesting reverse.
True. And I would also like to talk, as we are prepping our colleagues for their villains live stream, which is going to be happening not next Sunday, but the following Sunday, the 24th. And there may or may not be one of our editors wearing a cape. We don't know. But I think it's worth tuning in just to see if there is a cape involved. I'm just saying. But there is an intrinsic relationship between heroes and villains. And while we're talking about desire lines, I just want to throw it out there that one of the best ways to create automatic tension is by pitting the desire lines of the hero and the villain against each other and seeing what happens. And if there's anybody who wants to give an example or speak to that, I think it would be a nice way to lead into our next live stream.
Well, if you look at, so I've been listening to the Binge Mode Harry Potter podcast, which is awesome because I think so far I've listened to about 150 hours just analyzing